Everyone, I call this meeting to order. Bienvenue à la
Welcome to the 53rd meeting of the Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs.
Nous reconnaissons que nous sommes sur
We acknowledge that we meet on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples.
Is there unanimous consent that the clerk prepare a press release outlining the committee's upcoming travel to Cambridge Bay, Kugluktuk, and Yellowknife next week to be shared with local news outlets? Not seeing any objections. Adopted unanimously. Thank you. Notre réunion.
Our meeting today, just as those that we've had recently, is being held in a hybrid format.
Virtually, you know the rules to follow. For everyone else, before speaking, please wait till I recognize you by name. S'il vous plaît, adressez vos
Please address your interventions to myself, to the chair.
Please speak slowly and clearly. When you're not speaking, your microphone should be on mute. So, pursuant to Standing Order 108-2 and the motion adopted by the committee on November 21st, 2022, the committee is resuming its study of improving graduation rates of Indigenous students. Today, on our first panel, we welcome the Honourable Patty Hajdu, Minister of Indigenous Services Canada, who is here in person, as well as Deputy Minister Gina Wilson, also of Indigenous Services Canada, and in person. Of course, all of us may speak in the official language of our choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting in French, English, and Inuktitut. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. And I suggest you choose that language now so that you'll be ready when another language is spoken. With that, if interpretation is lost, please notify us and we'll interrupt briefly until we reestablish it. As is the custom, Minister Hajdu, we open the floor to you for introductory remarks. I understand you have a little bit more than 5 minutes. I was told 7 or 8 minutes, and I think that in the interests of hearing your presentation, that will be fine. So thank you very much. And after that, we'll proceed with questions. Over to you, Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Kwekwe Tansi, Ulukuk, good morning, bonjour. I'm very grateful to be here with you all today on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Je vous remercie de mon...
Thank you for inviting me to discuss the work the federal government is doing to improve education for Indigenous youth.
Now, I know that all of you have been working really diligently to understand the history of European settlement and the resulting policies that were meant to displace Indigenous peoples from their lands, traditions, and culture, and that resulted in many Indigenous children for generations being robbed of their right to thrive in communities with family and the right to access education comparable to non-Indigenous children, often in the same region or territory. In fact, in 2021, just over 53% of Indigenous students graduated from secondary school. 90% of non-Indigenous students in the same year successfully completed their high school education. That gap of 37% made up of young people with frustrated dreams and paths forward is a tragedy that we all have to work to end. In 2021, post-secondary education attainment rates for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis were 45.3%, 33.6%, and 56.3% respectively. And for non-Indigenous Canadians, it's about 70%. What a waste of talent. Talent that Canada needs now more than ever. It should be our collective commitment to make sure that we can change these outcomes for this generation and for the next one. And to change those outcomes, we need not just financial investment, but strong support for the leaders who are building and rebuilding education systems that are founded on and connected to language and culture from early learning to post-secondary. The mainstream schools have not served Indigenous students well, and the effects of racism and curriculum that whitewashes Indigenous perspectives and history have compounded the problem. Students on reserve must be funded comparably to students in provincial systems off reserve, and investments must be made in critical areas such as language and culture, full-day kindergarten, and before and after school programming. In 2016, the federal Liberal government began the work of creating new partnerships with Indigenous peoples to reform the way elementary and secondary school education is funded. The government set provincial education formulas as the new minimum base and agreed to modifications that address specific First Nations needs and priorities. To bring credibility to this work, the government has increased funding for elementary and secondary education for First Nations students on reserve by 74% since 2015. And we see encouraging signs that the new approach is working. As of 2021, just over 53% of First Nations youth between 18 and 24 years old had a secondary school diploma or equivalent. Now, that's still far too large of a gap, but the gap is getting smaller. But the deficit left by 10 years of sparse to no new money spent on Indigenous youth also meant that infrastructure is often decrepit or unsafe. Indigenous youth deserve and need safe places to learn. Indigenous Services Canada and AFN have commissioned studies that demonstrate the unacceptable and shameful gap in infrastructure between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. Since 2015, the federal government has committed $2.35 billion in targeted funding for school facilities, and $2.27 billion has been allocated, funding 250 projects, including 70 new schools. Of the 250 projects, 164 are now complete and 86 projects are ongoing. And these infrastructure investments serve 270 communities and about 313,000 students. It's a very important step towards closing the infrastructure gap by 2030. The federal government uses provincial formulas as a minimum base to address the equity gap. Partners have expressed that each regional area is unique, with some communities requiring support for transportation, teacher residences, and/or healthy meals as part of their education systems. Many Indigenous partners are pursuing self-determined education. 9 regional education agreements have been signed to restore control to First Nations on the design and delivery of education on reserve, ensuring that learning is grounded in culture and language, and that the funding formulas work best for each unique region. En juillet 2022,
In July 2022, I had the honor of joining Grand Chiefs and Chiefs of the First Nations Education Council to sign a multi-million-dollar regional education agreement with 22 First Nations supporting the First Nations Education Council in Quebec. At that event, I was moved by a young girl who opened the ceremony, speaking in her own Indigenous language of Mohawk, Kanyenkaha. She learned her language through an immersion program that she had joined in kindergarten.
moving. There are 50 agreements under development, and leaders are determined to provide education that results in confident and capable adults, rooted in culture and language. In January, I visited with Diane Roach, Director of Operations of the Xinhua Kinumage Gamig, who toured us through the new Anishinaabe Post-Secondary Institute, partially funded by FedNor. This institute works to preserve the integrity of Anishinaabe language and knowledge. I was greeted by students learning and teaching Ojibwe. The confidence, connection, and strength these students are building in themselves is a gift to their communities and to the generations to come. The promise of reconciliation is that every person in this country has the pride and confidence in themselves that they, too, can reach their full potential. Indeed, our country can only thrive if every First Nations, Inuit, and Métis child has hope for their future and the confidence that they can learn, grow, and contribute to their family, their community, the nation, and world. They must know that they have the best possibility to learn and they have equal opportunities for education and economic success. This will allow for the promise of a better future, success, and prosperity for all of us. And we will get there by ensuring that First Nations, Métis, and Inuit educators have the tools and resources they need to rightfully design and deliver the education that will help their youth succeed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. We'll now go to a first round of questions, each 6 minutes, beginning with Mr. Vidal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, and your Deputy Minister for being here today. I appreciate the opportunity to engage with you on this important discussion. Minister, you threw out a bunch of statistics about graduation rates, and the focus of the study, there is a graduation rate focus, but it's also in improving outcomes of education overall, which I guess is measured by graduation rates. But you threw out a bunch of numbers of Indigenous rates, but I want to talk for a few minutes just about the rates on First Nations. And from the departmental results report that I saw recently, it actually shows that the percentage of First Nation Reserve students who graduate from secondary school has declined by just over 6% in the last 4 or 5 years. I'm just curious what your comment would be to that, and where do you think the breakdown is there relative to the other improvements that you talked about?
Well, first of all, let me say that it's no small piece of work, I think, that the federal Liberal government increased funding by about 70% overall since we took office in 2015. And money was a big barrier for a very long time. And we know that sometimes turning data points around takes time. Because not only is it money, but it's also about curriculum and capacity of communities. I visited with Tatasqueyak just a while ago, and one of the points of interest that the community wanted me to see was their school. And their school is an aging school. It needs repairs. It needs significant enhancement, and Indigenous communities are some of the fastest growing communities in the entire country. So in Tatasqueyak, we talked about the increased capacity of the community to design and deliver their own curriculum. And the work that they were doing to try to reach those goals. So I think, my data shows that there has been an improvement on education outcomes since 2015. I will get the department to speak specifically to those numbers, and you can question the officials if you'd like. But I would say that what I would say is that the increase, although small, is tracking in the right direction. And what we need to see is more rapid success, and that's the promise of the education coordination agreements, is the self-determination.
I'm going to run out of time, Minister. I want to move on. In 2018, the Auditor General did a report, and one of the recommendations that and I'm going to paraphrase so I don't have to read all this, but they were talking about recommendations to Indigenous Services Canada in connection to closing the socioeconomic gaps, and education being one of those. And one of the things they said in the conclusions was that we've got to find things that are actually improving the lives of Indigenous people by using proper indicators rather than focusing on the amount of money spent. The ultimate goal is to improve lives and to improve these gaps. So the numbers I referred to are reported by Indigenous Services Canada, so we can move on from that and see where that goes. But there's also been a discussion by the Auditor General back in 2018 that the graduation reports on reserves was being reported inaccurately, that it was using a methodology where it was only measuring kids that started in grade 12 and not the cohort method that goes from grade 9 to 12 or grade 10 to 12 like most provincial systems do. So when we start comparing these rates, and you talked about the average being about 85% or something like that, and then I'm talking about rates as low as 34%, the Auditor General talked about those rates being even lower than that if we actually use the proper methodology. And it's my understanding that the new method, or there is a new method that was agreed to by the ADM in August of 2020 that would do the proper comparative rates. Are you aware of that? And how has that impacted the rates that you're measuring when you measure the success?
Well, first of all, let me just give you the data that I have here on your original question, which is the graduation rates increasing or decreasing since 2016. And thank you to the Deputy for finding the sheet with the data. In fact, in 2016, we saw a total graduation rate of 43.9% of First Nations from secondary high school graduations, and in 2021, 53.4. So that's a 10% increase actually over the last 6 years. So that's.
So sorry, Minister, are you saying the reports in the departmental results report are inaccurate then?
This is the data that I have.
Because the data I have presented to me by the Library of Parliament today says that they've decreased by 6.5%. in 4 years.
So we'll have to compare, and we'll get officials.
So maybe
during
you
the
can
second.
respond to us on that. Let me quickly, with a little bit of time I have left, the other challenge that that I saw was that you back in this whole process, there was a target that was supposed to be set for where graduation rates what we had liked them to be. It was supposed to be set by March of 2023. There was a target that is supposed to be set. Has that target been set? And can you tell us what that target is?
Thanks, Mr. Chair, just want to get back to another question about the variability of methodologies. So there is a high degree of variability of projected costs for differences in assumptions and methodologies for various studies. So I won't get into the detail of that, but just would state that. On your question of a target, I'd have to check. I don't have information on a specific target that we have established. So if you can maybe let us know where you source that, we can get back to you on that.
Sure. It was actually in the departmental results report for 2021, 2022 as well, where the target was set, or was supposed to be set by March of 2023, and I guess I'm going, it's March of 2023. So.
Yeah, fair enough.
We'll get back to you with the target then.
Fair enough. Thank you. All right. I think that's my time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vidal. We'll now go to Mr. Baptiste for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for joining us today. My question is going to be around the regional educational agreements and some of the challenges and barriers that we're seeing towards moving toward that direction. But to give some context, not everyone may be familiar with what regional educational agreements are. We have an amazing example of this in Nova Scotia with Mi'kmaq and Amadinaway. 20 years ago in Nova Scotia, the First Nations graduation rates were at 30%. Today, they're at 90%, some of the highest graduation rates of First Nations across the country. And when I talked to the co-chair of the organization, Chief Leroy Denny and his staff, Blair Gould, they all attributed it to the fact that now they're working together as communities collectively on education, and that through that collaboration, they're able to focus on language, on culture, on really decolonizing education. And you said in your speech that we've got 9 regional education agreements from across the country. I'm wondering if you could tell us what you've seen as the best practice. Why is this the best practices? Why is this working? And how we can create more communities that go down this route?
Well, thanks, and very much, MP Baptiste, and I'll just say that self-determination is the key out of this mess, actually. It's when Indigenous people have the tools and the control to be able to reassert their rights, actually, over education of their children and their communities. You know, when we took office, in fact, the federal government under Stephen Harper had actually eliminated federal funding for things that actually would have helped with MP Vidal's question. For example, the First Nations Statistical Institute had been dismantled. It was a key institution that allowed First Nations themselves to collect data that was crucial and required for self-governance. We've refunded that institute, and indeed have been spending significant amount of resources on funding First Nations control over how data is collected and how it's used to improve outcomes. I would also say that you hit on some really important aspects. It's about the curriculum and the language and the worldview that goes along with how people are educated in community. And I think you also pointed out something that I think is really beneficial, and that's when communities work together to have that capacity at a larger scale to be able to do regional education agreements that provide supports for some of the smaller communities that may not have that capacity to do it on their own. And communities work really, really hard on these regional education agreements. So it's a process of negotiation with the federal government so that everybody is comfortable when the reins are transferred to Indigenous communities, that they have the capacity to do exactly what they want to do, which is to increase education outcomes. The success is people who graduate, people who are proud of themselves, people who have confidence in their own stories, in their own capacity to develop to their full potential and to contribute back to their communities. So thank you for that question.
Thank you, Minister. And I think what I'm hearing from you when we talk about these regional education agreements is that long-term, predictable, and stable funding that's where the communities are accountable to each other as opposed to government is something that really is working. When we turn over jurisdiction, the last I saw from the Mi'kmaq and Amanui in 2019, we signed a 10-year agreements, and these long-term stable agreements are leading to great progress. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit, in your opinion, what is the role of culture and language, and how does that play an important role in closing the education gap within our communities?
Well, let me just reflect, first of all, on the long-term and predictable. And if those of you who have run organizations will know that when you have short-term funding, a year or 2 years, it's very hard to do a whole bunch of things, including plan for the future, but also to retain and recruit and retain really qualified educators. With those 10-year agreements, you can actually stabilize the education system that you're running, including ensuring the stability of educators. And those of you, I know there's some like Madame Gill, for example, and others who have been teachers and know that actually the relationship between students and teachers is actually an important part of outcomes. And when people don't have that confidence or that control, we see this frequently, especially in remote communities where teachers go in for a couple of years and then fly out for other greener pastures in teaching that maybe is closer to their own family or their own culture. In terms of culture and language, and again, this is coming from the chiefs, from the students, from the families that I've had an opportunity to speak with, everybody without a doubt says that when students feel safe and respected and understood and are learning curriculum that is relevant to their lives and to their own worldview, and having an opportunity to learn it in languages that oftentimes they've heard at home, whether it's through grandparents or other relatives, it provides a better sense of grounding for that student, and that student is more connected to that school. I mean, when we talk about the failure of education systems to graduate First Nation students from mainstream secondary schools, oftentimes it's those students have left school. It's not because they've reached grade 12 and failed. It's because they've often left schools because they don't feel that they don't feel welcome in those systems, or they've experienced disproportionate racism, either at the hands of the educators, which is extremely sad, but also by their peers. The curriculum is in some cases offensive, quite frankly, because it whitewashes their experience as Indigenous people. So this changes the page, and I have a real high degree of hope that we'll see more and more of these agreements come online in the next number of years.
Thank you, Mr. Baptiste. Nous irons maintenant à Madame Gill.
We will now turn to Ms. Gill. 6 minutes, Madam. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, and thank you as well to Madam Minister Patty Hajdu and Ms. Wilson for being with us today as well. What you've shared with us, Ms. Hajdu, speaks to me. You've reached me on this. I think we both agree on matters of language and culture, how important they are, and how much they count to ensure the success of students. It's so important that their identity be championed. Perhaps you'll give me a chance for the next few minutes to discuss the audit of 2018 of the Auditor General's Office. Mr. Vidal has touched on it already. Specifically, regarding data. Something that I found very surprising, and I would have liked to follow up on what was underscored in 2018 to the effect, for example, that, the report, it was about the report on socioeconomic gaps for First Nations communities. So it was about the data being irrelevant and being inadequately drawn up and not being adequately used either for making departmental decisions. I would like to know whether the department has ensured that now its data is up to scratch and relevant and adequate to found decisions on.
And yes, in fact, the elementary and secondary programs now using a new cohort-based high school graduation rate methodology that's going to align better with the current pan-Canadian high school graduation rate. And this is going to improve the department's ability to understand and measure the difference in high school graduation rates between First Nations students on reserve and the non-Indigenous population across Canada. We anticipate that the new cohort-based graduation rate methodology data will be published in the departmental report for 22-23, which either is coming out or should be out now. I remember editing the minister's message, so it must be coming soon. But I will also just point to the fact that the work that we're doing to reinvest in Indigenous people's data sovereignty, the ability to collect, analyze, and use that data through Indigenous-led data institutes is another really key piece of this, because of course the way we assess the data and the way Indigenous partners do may be different.
Je ne voulais pas vous interrompre.
Didn't want to interrupt you. As you know, we would always like to have more time to discuss these matters in depth with you, but I certainly understood your opening statement, but I have no information to the effect that the data now being gathered is different or that new types of data are being gathered to ensure that their relevance is appropriate. But look, I've got other questions down on this same sort of matter. Other studies have said that the accuracy of data hasn't been checked and that they weren't communicated to First Nations either. That was back in 2018, of course. But I'd just like to know what's been done since. Has the data been shared with First Nations? And has anything else been done to ensure that the data that might have been sent to the First Nations was actually accurate? And of course, I've got two other questions, but let's begin with this.
Well, first of all, I just want to reiterate that there is a new approach and a new methodology that the department has begun, and I think that it's important that we have accurate data and that we share the data. And the principle of the department is to share data that's relevant to the community with the community. In terms of how that's done, I would have to turn to officials for the details about how the frequency of that sharing and how that's done. But yes, it's important for First Nations to have control over data. It's important for First Nations to know what's happening in their own communities so that they can use that information to either advocate or to change approaches or to design programs and services. So the value that the department has around truth and transparency would require data sharing. Yeah, and Deputy would like to add just really quickly.
If I may, Madam, just a few details. I would like to add that there's a good deal of difference between provinces and territories when it comes to data management and how data is gathered and handled. Yes, of course, everything's relative. Nothing's black or white. Of course, that being said, it's our job to put questions. You've discussed methodology. Methodology can change, of course, but is the data relevant? That remains an important question. And, of course, that is linked to data changes can be corrected with methodology changes, but it's not a sure matter that the methodology has been changed. The Auditor General hasn't re-audited, and perhaps if they do, then we'll be able to evaluate any potential changes on methodology and whether they have had any potential effect on the relevance of data. Now, of course, methodology, it's not a study methodology. It's a matter of data that's being used, what's being used, use is made of the data, and is that data relevant? So the second part of my question, I don't think an answer was given, but perhaps this might be something that would be sent to audit, and perhaps, Chair, that I'm over time. Yes, indeed. Thank you, Ms. Gill. We will now hear from Ms. Idlout for 6 minutes, and there will be another round in any case.
Inuit who live they try to eradicate our language in the school system. The federal government, given that the Indigenous Languages Act in Section 10.11 says and states, federal institutions will provide access and services in Indigenous languages. How many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit schools have access to education in their own Indigenous language? Are they delivering education services in their own languages now?
Education that's delivered in Indigenous languages. It would really depend, I think, on the community capacity, and on the desire of the community. There are some communities that are not there yet, and there are other communities that have full immersion programs, but Deputy would like to weigh in.
Very quickly, the Office of the Commissioner of the Indigenous Languages, the OSIL, recently sent a letter to all federal deputies across town asking for feedback on what departments are doing to promote First Nation, Inuit, Métis languages. So that's going to be compiled in his report in the next few months.
Okay. Thank you. I will expect that. And I look forward to reading it and studying it. It is important to me how many schools in Inuit lands do get delivery in their own language now, instructional delivery. The second question I'd like to ask, the federal government, for the past 46 years, from 1951 to 1997, paid to build and staff 13 residential schools in Nunavut. With the express purpose of eradicating Inuit culture and languages. Since reconciliation is so important, will this Liberal government fund 13 Inuit language and culture schools in the near future? Will you fund 13 Inuit language schools plus cultural schools, combination of language and culture?
On your previous question, MP, 92% of students attending First Nations administered schools are taught at least one subject in a First Nations language. But I will say, just in my own experience with French immersion, our French class, there is probably a long ways to go, because we know that sometimes it's hard to learn a language when it's only one course or one opportunity per semester or per day. In terms of the language schools across for Inuit, what I would say is that the government of Canada established what's called, and you know about this, the permanent bilateral mechanisms in 2016 to talk about the very thing that you're raising, which is what are the joint priorities, what are the policies that Inuit want us to proceed with and to pursue, and in what order, and how we can monitor progress on those priorities. I will also say that, as you know, that education is delivered through the territories in an agreement with the province, in Nunavut. The agreement is with the territory of Nunavut, and I did meet with the Education and Deputy Minister Pamela Gross in February to talk about those priorities that she has, particularly the funding and support available under the Inuit Child First Initiative. And we agreed that we would work towards a tripartite table, actually, because of the discord that's happening between people that feel that the territory is not doing a good job of preserving language and culture and not feeling the outcomes of the education investments by the territory through the federal government. And so that work will begin hopefully soon of setting up that tripartite table, and I'm looking forward to the first meeting, because what Minister Gross and I agreed on is that regardless of how we get there, we have to do a better job, and that Inuit children have to have the equal opportunity to learning that I spoke about in my opening remarks. I think this is a positive development.
Thank you, Ms. Elout. We'll start a second round, and we'll go with Mr. Vidal for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Minister, you're going to be happy you're sitting over there so I don't spill any water on you while we're conversing here. I'm going to follow up on the conversation we were having and suggest to you that you don't need to get back to me on those statistics, because when I go back both in the 2020, 2021, and the 2022, that's where those numbers are coming from. It's on page 25 of the 2021 report, where those graduation rates, in fact, it's the line below the data point you were just talking about in response to Ms. Idlout. So in your own departmental results reports 2 years in a row that you signed off on, Minister, it identifies the percentage of First Nation on-reserve students that graduate has declined from 40.5% to 34.2%. So let me put this into perspective for you, Minister. You want to go back and blame the 10 years prior, but after 8 years of being in government, after 8 years, the graduation rates of on-reserve First Nation students have declined by 6.5%. That means for every 100 kids that enter into the system, and we don't even know if we're measuring these results right, because that's part of the process that's still coming. For every 100 kids, we've lost over 6 of those kids in the process, and that's terrifying. It's tragic. The rates are less than half of what the provincial systems are in the first place, and they're declining. Do you have a further response than what you gave me before to that?
Thank you. I mean, first of all, the data that I'm drawing from is from Statistics Canada. So it's Statistics Canada 2021 census data. So
Minister, the data that I'm drawing from is your department.
And so I will say this. The path that we're on towards self-determination is critically important to Indigenous partners. I will tell you that the increase in funding per capita is critically important to Indigenous partners. And I will also say that we are hearing back from partners that they are seeing improvements. In my own community, in my own riding, speaking with Long Lake 58, for example, and Chief Desmoulin there, since being able to educate children from K to grade 12, they are seeing graduation rates shooting up, and I don't want to give you a number, but approaching the provincial rate, and are extremely happy with the outcomes for their young people who are now taking that secondary education and going to post-secondary and coming back to community, by the way, and using that education in community to do all the things that the community needs done. So,
thank you, Minister. These are one-off statistics. The numbers from your department are nationwide numbers that the department, I'm assuming, is measuring accurately, but maybe that's not the case. Just further down the same page on the departmental results report is on page 26 of that report is where it identifies that this target is to be set by March of 2023. And I'm sorry, I have to admit that I'm extremely disappointed that neither you nor your deputy minister is aware of this target or this date of setting a target. That it seems profound to me that you don't know what the commitments that your own department has made, or that the deputy minister doesn't know those commitments when I asked the question earlier.
I would say that my target is that every student that has the capacity and the desire to graduate can graduate. That is my target, but I will, again, are there officials in the back that have a target rate for us?
It's in development now. It'll be published in the next departmental report.
While we're waiting for that, so he indicated that there will be a target established. So I really don't know what target you're speaking of. You're talking to one referenced in a departmental report 2 years ago?
It was in the report in 2020, 2021, and it was also in the report of 2021, 2022.
So we're going to find that But we're going to find that, sir.
So the official, if I heard him right, said it's going to be set in the next report or something. So there's a time frame then that we can expect that?
I think he's indicating fall
of this year kind of thing,
right.
We'll have that target?
That's right.
Okay, we will watch for that target then. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
You had about 30 seconds.
Can I take that?
If the answer is within 30 seconds, too.
Okay. Thank you very much, Minister, and to Deputy Minister. So you're telling me and you're telling this committee that the two top officials in the department had no idea what was in their departmental plan when it came to setting a target for graduation rates? The two top people. I just want to be clear.
I'm sorry. Listen, I have committed that we'll make sure that you have the target by this fall and that you will know what that target
Know
is.
about it. That's what's so concerning. The two top people had no clue that there was targets in your departmental report that needed to be set. And nobody knew about it.
Well,
Into a study that we're talking about Indigenous graduation, which is going down according to your departmental data.
Well, listen, there's a heck of a lot of deflection coming right now from the conservative side of the table. Who
I'm taking your data.
Had a decade.
This is your information. Netflix wasn't a thing when the conservatives lost power.
We lost a decade.
You had 8 years.
And I am thrilled.
You're going
that our
down.
Government is now
and you don't,
funding
you
equitably.
and your top department.
I'm going to bring this to an end. The time is up.
Set.
Thank you, Mr. Schmale. We're now going to go to Ms. Atwin for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Minister and Deputy Minister for joining us today. Hopefully I can get us back on track with my line of questioning. As I've mentioned before, this is deeply close to my heart, and my whole past was involved in Indigenous education here in New Brunswick. I think back to a lot of the things that many of the people I worked with would like me to ask for sure. And of course, the biggest piece is around, the funding gap that existed. So really happy to hear, that 70% increase in funding has occurred since 2015. I'm just thinking, are you hearing that on the ground? Is that some of the most common thing that you're hearing as you tour the country? Just speaking with those with on-reserve schools, with those that have students attending off-reserve schools, is funding the biggest component that's kind of missing in this?
Well, thanks for the question, MP Atwin, and thanks also for your service as an educator. And you're absolutely right. I fully believe that education is the key that unlocks generational poverty. As someone who's first in my family to graduate with a post-secondary education, it's near and dear to my heart. And what I hear from communities is two things. One, there is a recognition that there is improved funding for students by 70%. Since 2015. Let's be clear. We're not talking about 10% or 20% more. We're talking 70% more on average. We are now at provincial comparability. But what I also hear is that there are still gaps in learning because of the gap being so neglected for so long. I was talking about a decade of darkness. That's a decade of lost multiple generations of students who were not funded comparably to their provincial systems, who fell behind and who, in fact, not only were they not funded, those school systems comparably, but institutes that helped First Nations do things like gather data were defunded, were starved of the resources that they need so that First Nations themselves could make good decisions about how to move forward on education. What I'm hearing is, please let's not go back there. We need long-term agreements that is going to solidify this funding so that we never see a government again cut funding for Indigenous education or cut funding for Indigenous infrastructure or cut funding for Indigenous water or all of the things that we saw in complete decrepit decay when we took office in 2015. It's a lot of work and a lot of financial commitment, but First Nations communities are doing that work with us, and I can tell you that there is a groundswell of change happening. Now, what people fear the most is a return to the past. They fear that if our government isn't around, if a conservative government is elected, that they're going to lose those gains. And quite frankly, MP Atwin, that's why we're working on long-term agreements with First Nations so they have the runway, the autonomy, and the sufficiency of funding to make sure that we don't end up in that place again. Thanks very much for the question.
Thank you very much for that answer. And again, I've studied this even before I entered into education, and then came to this place, and to see the growth over the last couple of years is incredible, and we're feeling it in communities across the country. Of course, we're focusing on, how to improve graduation rates and those kinds of outcomes. But I'm also wondering, with a focus on excellence in education for Indigenous peoples across the country, what's the most effective measure our government can take to increase First Nation enrollment in post-secondary education?
Well, thank you very much, and it's a really great segue. I will also say that, and I didn't want to lose sight of this, that our commitment to funding Jordan's Principle and making sure that every child gets the support through Jordan's Principle, ending, generations of neglect on behalf of governments at all levels towards First Nations children, is also helping with education, is also helping with retention in school systems and supports for families who want to make sure their kids can succeed. In terms of post-secondary education, this is something that as I mentioned, is near and dear to my heart. And you can see in communities that have, the capacity, for example, with own source revenue to augment the supports from the federal government to ensure that every student that has the ability to go to post-secondary training or education can actually get there and can stay enrolled in those schools, what actually happens. And what happens is people graduate with the skills that are needed to run communities. So people come back nurses and accountants, lawyers and doctors and civil engineers and construction workers, and communities begin to thrive because residents themselves are taking control over that community and being able to run that community in a way that is Indigenous-centered and entrusted by the community. I look at the community of Bitagong in my own riding, who 40, 50 years ago made a commitment to ensure that every child that wanted to access post-secondary could, and they have a wraparound program where they make sure that children are attached to community members so that if they're struggling while they're away from school, they can connect with community and remind themselves again about why they're doing this and who they are in a culturally appropriate way. And those students are coming back, and 50 years later, that community is, the teachers are from Bitagong, the nurses are from Bitagong, the water operators are from Bitagong, the construction workers are from Bitagong, and they have a number of economic development opportunities, including the approval of a mine in a joint project with the nearby town of Marathon. That's the kind of potential that communities have when we see post-secondary students succeed. And it's been a priority for me as the minister to make sure that I impress that on my colleagues, that we need to continue our journey to ensure that the supports are there. Now, students are entitled for Canada student loans and grants, which, by the way, we doubled. So children that are in poverty, or young people that are in poverty, adults that are in poverty, and a first-time applicant to Canada student loans and grants are going to get more money for the tuition aspect and some of the living expenses. But there is a need for additional supports often, and that's to make sure that we can retain people in oftentimes environments that are very new and different and difficult for people to stay in.
Thank you. Madame Gill, à vous la parole.
Ms. Gill, I recognize you. You have the floor for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. So let's get back to earlier. We were speaking of the Auditor General's report, the matter of adequate and relevant data and their accuracy, as well as their being shared with Indigenous communities. We mentioned methodology that doesn't always guarantee all that, but at least we do have some confirmation that something has changed at the department to improve matters. There was another item that was brought up then, not necessarily linked to methodology, but I would like to hear your point of view on the reason why, when results were discussed, there were several indicators for which there wasn't any information. Important number, 17 indicators out of the 23. So I'd like to know why that was the case, why that data was missing, those results were missing, and of course whether since then we have managed to provide the information for all the indicators. Thank you.
I would have to have more specific indicators. I don't have the report in front of me, but can you draw out a couple examples for me?
Des exemples des différents.
Examples of the various indicators? Well, for me, it's over and beyond the matter of an example. When we are told, the auditor told us that there were 23, let's just go with that number. So that results should be provided for each of the 23 indicators. The department itself had come up with those, and there were only 17. That's like around 75% of the indicators, that didn't have any results. And as I said, this was about elementary and secondary education on reserve. So was there a reason for which you were unable or it was impossible to provide results? And what has been done to provide more information, as many results as possible, under each of the indicators since then?
I think this new cohort-based high school graduation rate methodology is going to improve the department's ability to both gather data and measure the difference in high school graduation rates, for example. That is part of the departmental report for 2022-23, and the targets that we were talking about earlier that will be available this fall. This is really about working with First Nations in a respectful way, though, by the way, to leverage data and support discussions with First Nations about how to collect those data in a way that's logical and respectful. I would assume that when you see the kind of underfunding that existed prior to 2015, that educators, and those of you who have been educators in the room know that days are busy enough without actually spending another couple hours, collecting data and organizing data. Now with comparable funding, there is more capacity at education systems to be able to do that collection of data. And I think that with things like the First Nations Statistical Institute, our Data Institute, I think I have the name wrong, Mr. Chair, but the institute that we're funding around statistics and data, I think there's going to be an ability for First Nations to leverage some of those investments in the pan-Canadian institutions that serve First Nations.
I'm sorry, Chair, I've lost interpretation.
An interpretation problem, translation into French. Could we check on that, please? Okay, should perhaps just to recap a little bit, Minister, back. Go ahead, Minister, when you're ready.
Just to say that not only are we changing the methodology in the way that we assess data coming out of First Nations, but also supporting First Nations in the area of how they will share data and their data sovereignty. As you can imagine, data has been used in some ways to make excuses for the poor investments that we've seen over decades in First Nations education. And so First Nations people want data sovereignty, and they want the ability to weigh in on how that data is used and where it's used. And so we work respectively with First Nations communities on that. The formula the approach that we're taking is to work with First Nations on how best to do this in a respectful way, and that respects their own individual capacities.
Merci, Madame Gill.
Thank you, Ms. Gill.
Conclude with 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. I have many questions, but I will have to stick to one question. And in people from Nunavut, or in Nunavut, the schools and the people have the hardest time with resources. Many people are truant from attendance because they live in overcrowded housing. They live in very old, decrepit, mold-infested homes. Even if they wanted to go to school, there are things that prevent them from going to school regularly. But once they get to school, the schools, once they get to school, institutions, the schools are also very old and need repairs. Resources prevent us. Infrastructure and people who have been residential school survivors, they have a lot of pain. there's a lot of intergenerational trauma that's being passed from residential schools. I believe that it is very important that we keep that in mind and concentrate on trauma from residential schools and intergenerational trauma. I will ask you about the learning institutions in Nunavut. Our institutions are overcrowded and are very old buildings. We know that the Nunavut government should be managing and operating those. But if they aren't going to get enough monies through bilateral agreements from federal government, those issues will never be addressed. It is critically important that we increase the government funding to the territorial government institutions. It needs our bilateral funding to territorial governments has got to be increased drastically. People who graduate will increase in numbers once the infrastructure is okay. I have many questions about schools in Nunavut, but I have to limit to this.
I don't know how much time I have, Mr. Chair, but I'll just take a stab at, first of all, answering the meat of the question, which is that with so much trauma, and I think this is true of Inuit children, but not only Inuit children, residential school trauma, the infliction of trauma as a result of the experience of colonization is in the DNA of Indigenous people in this country. And it for sure impacts people's capacity to learn, and it for sure impacts their capacity to stay in school and to focus. And you're absolutely right. It intersects with the shortage of housing and with the many other ways that Indigenous people experience poverty in communities all across this country. And that's why the work that we're doing to close the infrastructure gap by 2030, which is an ambitious goal, is so critically important. Because you're right, if you're living in a household of 14 people, and what that tangibly means, some elders and some parents have told me, is that people need to sleep in shifts. You take turns sleeping because there isn't time or there isn't space for everyone to have, quote unquote, a normal night. That is obviously not compatible with learning or with education. And so what I hope here and today, and I really hope, is that when we see Budget 2023, that we don't see a repeat of what we saw in Budget 2021 and 2022, which is the Conservative Party in particular voting against the investment in Indigenous peoples, the voting against the investment in education. $1.2 billion in 2021 that was invested in education, and it was voted against. $6 billion for infrastructure, including shovel-ready infrastructure projects that are ready to go, operation and maintenance costs, voted against by Conservatives. $107.9 million for elementary and secondary education.
Sorry. I need to interrupt you because I don't know if my question was interpreted. My question was, can you commit to investing more in education so that there's improved schools, the schools are renovated, that they're getting the expansions that they were promised? I've been to Whale Cove, I've been to Akvet, to Coral Harbor, all of them having been promised extensions because they're of the overcrowded, not enough classrooms.
Ms. Sidlaut, just finish your question, and we'll have to have a quick answer. We're past our time.
In investments for schools in Nunavut.
And thank you, MP Idlut. Apologies for not answering that at the front. I will say that that's the point behind the tripartite table, to work with the government of Nunavut and the government of Canada together with Inuit leaders to make sure that we do everything together that we can to ensure people have schools that are safe and that are going to work for the education of Inuit children.
Thank you very much, Minister Hajdu, for appearing before us today as we look at the issue of education for the Indigenous people. And thank you very much, Deputy Minister Wilson, for also being on hand. We will suspend briefly, committee, and prepare for our second panel. Thank you.
Ms. Saville and
Resuming, we'll like to welcome our second panel. We have with us from Crown and Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs, we have Ms. Angela Bate, who's Director General by video conference, as well as Dion Saville, Director General Implementation Branch, also by video conference today. And with us in the room, we have this is from the Department of Indigenous Services. We have Rory O'Connor, Director General, Regional Infrastructure Delivery Branch, as well as Jonathan Allen, who's a director with the department. Welcome to all of you. I understand that there are no opening statements, but that you are here to answer our questions, so we'll launch into that right away. We'll start with 6 minutes with Mr. Zimmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And maybe just for clarity, the witnesses again, because I know there's an update to the agenda this morning. But the member from Yukon, who does the person represent again, just for clarity?
Well, these are two people. These are all people from departments, from federal departments. Okay. 2 from Crown Indigenous Relations and 2 from ISC.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying, Chair. I'll start off with, I have some questions. As a former teacher myself, I taught in high school for 7 years, and I was a bit unique, I guess, in my education. I became a tradesman. I was a red seal carpenter. I'm a red seal carpenter, and then I went and got 2 degrees after. So I have kind of both sides of the fence. I've seen a trades education and also university. But So I have a heart for trades training, let me put it that way. But I'll dig into this article from Nunavut News, and it was dated June 26, 2021. Statistics Canada reported as of 2016 that 41% of Inuit had attained their high school diploma. Among Inuit living within Inuit Nunavut, 28.2% reported a post-secondary qualification compared to Inuit living outside of Inuit Nunavut at 53.3%. It is working, but not to its fullest capacity, says PC Pitsulak, Nunavut Arctic College, Nunana campus dean and member of the Arctic and Northern Policy Frameworks Task Force on Northern Post-Secondary Education. So I'll start off with that. You know, it's not a great stat. One thing that I always found a bit of the joy of being a teacher and a coach was to see kids in my class succeed and go off, and they'd come to me later on and say, Mr. Zimmer, I'm a welder now, or I've got my degree, and you can't be happier for students that have achieved more success after they've been in my class. So, but there's still problems. So I'll quote an article, and the article is the insufficiency of high school completion rates to redress educational inequities among Indigenous students. That's the article, and I'll quote a paragraph in it that I think is kind of telling. Notably absent from these plans is consultation with First Nations communities regarding their perspectives on potential improvements and the accessibility of the system. Since we understand that on-reserve First Nations students have the lowest graduation rates, perhaps engaging with these communities on collaborative strategies through the accountability framework could drastically increase learners' success in the education system and reduce pervasive disparity. It says, for example, the increases in the graduation rates to near parity for Indigenous learners in the Northern British Columbia School District previously referenced was built upon strong relationships and collaboration with First Nations. So, and I had this question for the minister, but I understand she could only be here for an hour. But I guess we can talk about this all day long. We can have meetings to 10 years and 20 years and still have more meetings and more meetings. We can throw funding at the problem. But unless we're consulting with First Nations communities to ask, okay, what do we need to do to fix this? Then we're going nowhere. We're spinning in circles and just spending a lot more money, not getting anywhere. And the sad part of it is the kids are the ones that lose, because they're the ones that end up at a lower graduation rate, less of an opportunity going forward. So what I wanted to do is ask whoever is part of the department, what are you doing to consult with First Nations about how to increase these rates, graduation rates and success rates among Indigenous students in Indigenous communities?
So if your question is to ISC, it's these two gentlemen in the room.
Sure,
so,
or the ones online too.
who are Crown Indigenous Relations.
Sure.
If you could point to one of the departments at least.
Yeah, I look for an answer from any of them. If they can give me, if they're working on this, I'd like to hear it.
Mr. Allen, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. So in the context of First Nations engagement and co-development for elementary and secondary education, that was a fundamental tenet of how education transformation for secondary was undertaken that led to the implementation of a new funding approach in 2019.
Let me just stop you. I'm not talking about funding approaches. I'm talking about actually dealing with curriculum, whatever shortfalls are there in delivery. Because funding, I don't think, is the question. Yeah, funding might be part of the problem. But when you talk about graduation rates, there's other systemic issues there that we have to fix. And I've seen issues with the non-Indigenous community and graduation rates and how to fix them too, and they're different. But I want to hear if you're consulting with First Nations communities to find solutions to get the rates higher. Are you doing that? It's not just about, I don't want to hear about money right now.
Yes, we are engaging and co-developing in a couple of different contexts. So there are technical tables that look at the ongoing implementation of the elementary and secondary program. And they exist in different formats depending on who our partners are in each region. Ontario is an example. There's a region-wide technical table that has education practitioners, administrators who do look at the funding formula, but also what it does, the types of data and outcomes. The permanent bilateral mechanisms also look at education writ large and what partners want. and regional.
So looking at things, I still haven't heard where they're actually talking, where you say, okay, we're, like we have Doig and Blueberry First Nation in my community, there's Halfway, there's Prophet River. I haven't heard an example of, yes, we are sitting down at this particular forum to discuss on how to increase our graduation rates in First Nations communities. I still haven't heard you say that. If maybe it's intertwined in that explanation, but please, if you have that, say it now.
The technical tables I referred to include both the implementation of the funding and the outcomes. What are the challenges, the hurdles, the objectives that our partners are looking for that can then be tied to the implementation to get to those results? It starts with the money, gets to the results, and also regional education agreement tables.
Okay, so if you are, and I know my time's short, so I apologize. So if this is happening, so outcomes are an important thing. We can do this for, again, 20 years and never arrive on a landing spot. When is the deadline for these outcomes to be kind of, okay, here's the goal, folks. We're going to try and have this out the door by the end of 2023 to change things going forward. Do we have a timeline in place where this is supposed to be in place?
So the departmental plans, which were referred to earlier with the minister and deputy minister, set a year deadline to set the targets. COVID has pushed those out. That's what's in our most current departmental plan. We're working with the AFN and those partners at those tables that I mentioned.
What's the deadline?
It's looking at setting them for March 2023 for publishing in the next round of departmental plan and reports. And the issue there is co-developing them takes time and takes trust. And what's emerging, what we're hearing is rather than a target, is a year-over-year improvement or check-in is more representative of what our partners are facing and how they deliver their systems. So that is the kind of dialogue we're having at the technical tables, at regional education agreements, and with the AFN and other groups looking at specifically the outcomes.
Yeah, the one thing that...
Thank you, Mr. Simmer. We're way over time, but we'll go to Mr. Hanley for 6 minutes.
Thank you. I'm a guest on this committee, and I appreciate the opportunity to participate. This is an important study, so thanks to the committee members for putting this study forward. My interest in First Nation education and graduation rates, I think, began in my days as Yukon's Chief Medical Officer of Health when I recognized and wrote about the relationship between First Nation graduation rates and future opportunities in health and well-being. And in the Yukon, there was a critical, you might even say scathing 2019 Auditor General's report, I'm sure you're familiar with, that showed little progress in graduation rates amongst Yukon First Nations, and with a gap not only between First Nation and non-First Nation, but also an urban-rural gap. And I think one of the most significant developments we've seen since that report, with a real sense of urgency, was the creation of the Yukon First Nation Directorate. And then just a year ago, February 2022, a First Nation school board with elected trustees. And I think to answer maybe some of Mr. Zimmer's questions, I think that there is an example here of some real partnerships with First Nation governments and First Nation people in the Yukon to really take things in a different direction and hopefully augment and accelerate progress towards better outcomes. So with that kind of overall context, I think my first question is Ms. Saville, because I know that you're based in the Yukon, but I wonder if you could just briefly tell me your role vis-a-vis First Nation education writ large, but perhaps specifically as relates to what's going on in the Yukon.
Thank you, MP Hanley. Yes, so I've recently changed roles. I'm now the Director General of the Implementation Sector, but have worked with Yukon First Nations on developing their own vision for education in the Yukon for their children. And that has meant, as you say, the First Nation school boards and the Yukon First Nation Education Directorate, but also in their self-government agreements and their modern treaties, Yukon First Nations do have jurisdiction over the provision of education programs and services for citizens choosing to participate. So self-governing Yukon First Nations also have the ability to assume responsibility for the territorial programs and services. That being said, to date, they have chosen to focus on a First Nation school board and also the First Nation Education Directorate, which is funded through Indigenous Services Canada Education Partnerships Program to the tune of about $2.8 million annually. And we have seen successes in First Nation programming on the land and through language and culture, which has been introduced into the school system.
Actually, thank you. That's a perfect segue into my second question, which was about language and culture, because as you've indicated, there have also been significant investment in programming recently in First Nation language programs, including language nests, immersion programs for youth, immersion programs for adults even. And I want to both point that out, but also maybe have you comment on the relationship between how that relates to improving ultimately educational outcomes in the Yukon, and how important is the federal support for language development and really the resuscitation of imperiled First Nation and Indigenous languages. And that's open to either you, Ms. Saville, or anyone who might want to jump in on that.
Well, the Yukon First Nations have had program service transfers of federal funding around Indigenous languages, and that has enabled many of them to start immersion programs. So, for example, Champagne and Ajax First Nation has a complete immersion program where they recently graduated 30 students. So there's a real language revitalization, which is they're linking to success for student outcomes. And other First Nations, because of that example, are following along. And with Yukon University, there's a language center there, a Native Language Center, that is producing tools for teachers to teach in the schools the First Nation languages in each of the traditional territories. So I'll leave it at that and see if my colleagues have anything they would like to add.
Thank you. I'd add as well that First Nations on Reserve, a part of the education transformation funding, includes an enhancement beyond the provincial comparability base, regardless of what provinces provide for Indigenous language and culture. The department's funding formula in each region with First Nations on Reserve adds to that funding, because our studies and our partners tell us how fundamentally important seeing their language and culture, learning their language reflected in curriculum, creates more of an attachment to school, to participation, to perseverance, as well as post-secondary, future post-secondary attachment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hanley. Madame Gill, à vous la parole pour 6 minutes.
Ms. Gill, over to you for 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Over the last hour of our meeting with Madam Minister Hajdu, we had brought up the Auditor General's report 2020 about undergraduate education, high school education, and secondary school education. And we discussed data, getting hold of data to help us read clearly what is happening. And I've been wondering, given at the very end that I was bringing up indicators, 23 of them, for which 17 did not come with answers data-wise. Of course, I understand that it is the department itself which comes up with its own indicators. So, on one hand, you haven't got any data for the indicators, so you can't discuss results because you haven't any data for the indicators you've developed. And we're told that should have changed, and I hope that's the case. In the same line of thinking, I'd like to know, of course, one has specific targets, one hopes to meet them, and in 2015, in December, a report was tabled, a report about recommendations, truth and reconciliation recommendations, and in the report it was said that a strategy had to be developed with Indigenous communities, a strategy to close the gaps between Indigenous communities and the rest of Canada in education specifically, and specifically schooling outcomes. Then the government said that it had set up measures to close these gaps. 2015. The government, shortly after that, said that it was setting up measures and actions to deal with the gaps, and then not long after, you have this Auditor General's report to the effect that, look, all said and done, it's not working. We haven't any data, so we're not able to tell, even with the funding, it's not working, so we need to completely review the strategy in order to be able to succeed. So I would like to know, on one hand, whether there is a strategy that has been set up since then. And, of course, it's up to the government to ensure that these gaps are closed. So what are the new measures that you intend to use, of course, besides those that existed before, but the new measures that have been undertaken, and of course you can provide details on that as well as other topics, because of course we're discussing funding per se, but it's over and above funding for education. My colleague Mr. Henley mentioned languages earlier, and language was mentioned in a prior study. These are all linked topics, so of course feel free to go at this any way you wish. Thank you, Ms. Gill.
Transformation is and First Nations control of First Nations education on reserve for elementary and secondary is our driving mandate, our driving purpose, and that transformation attached to funding, to the program structure, and outcomes, and reporting, and data. And the Auditor General's report really drove a lot of that. The Minister spoke about the change to the graduation rate, which was criticized in the Auditor General's report because it focused only on students who had entered grade 12 and graduated. We've moved and will be reporting in the next cycles of plans and reports a cohort-based, which matches more what Census Canada does, as well as what provinces do and what our partners do as they support students throughout their high school career towards attainment, not just those at the end. So that's a concrete change that's driven right by that Auditor General report. Also, we looked at the type of data, the amount of data and the reporting burden, and have reduced that. A part of the program structure of transformation was eliminating proposal-based programs, which were very cumbersome and resulted in funding and activities that weren't evenly or fairly distributed across the country or within regions. So the elimination of those and the move to a formula basis greatly reduced the number of proposals and reports that partners would need to go through. And the changing performance measurement framework that the department works on is really targeted on what drives the funding out in a transparent, predictable way, and creating that space to co-develop indicators with our partners, as well as through regional education agreements, which are the most powerful part of our mandate to have First Nations define their vision, their voice, their outcomes. And the recent CEPN in Quebec, the First Nations Education Council, who I understand a witness will be appearing here in the future, is exactly about that, letting First Nations have those three parts, the transformed funding, the structure, and the outcomes, to define how they will see their students under their control advance. Thank you.
Mis à part, si nous voulons, j'ai encore un peu de temps.
So besides that, if we wish to, so I've got a bit more time. So besides the programs, you've said that the difficulty is the sort of administrative chaos, the matters of data as well, changing indicators, changes to allow First Nations themselves to take charge. I mean, at this point, at least it's some of them when it comes to the data. Do you have any other measures intended to close the gap? I don't want to go back to using measures again and again, but measures taken in another sense. Have you measured the impact since 2015? I think my colleague, Mr. Vidal, brought this up, that we don't necessarily see much difference, perhaps, in the way it's calculated. Nevertheless, the number of graduates isn't rising. So you table a report, there's a goodwill, working on many aspects of the problem, but all said and done, on the ground, and this may link up to what Mr. Zimmer said, what can we actually see in the figures? By figures. We know that data, that's figures, but for the population, what is the rate of graduation for youth, First Nations youth, and of course they're adults as well?
Attainment is the census data, StatsCan, which is what the minister spoke to in part. Some of the earlier questions dealt with the department's reporting, and again, those are very different facets of the population. The census is 18 to 24, voluntary identification, and its attainment level, the highest, with secondary being the highest level of education attainment. The graduation rates that have been published in departmental reports have decreased over time, but within that is part of the issue pointed out by the Auditor General and the reason why the methodology has changed, and that is informed by engaging with our partners as well through co-development, through transformation, to get to a more representative cohort graduation. That's what our partners are telling us. Many of them agreed with the Auditor General as well, that it was too focused grad rate in the past. So those are the concrete measures we've taken. The results are not up for publishing yet. They will be included in the next round of report, and we'll create that baseline for going forward to capture what changed in 2015, as you asked, and transformation in 2019. I do also have to flag that co-development is a key part of this. We learn from top-down, setting top-down expectations, so we do work to co-develop at the venues that I discussed a bit earlier with partners, and it also takes time for that, and also COVID has been hugely disruptive. So not only did the transformation in 2019 change that program structure, the reporting, and the funding, right after that is COVID, which disrupted the actual launch of the implementation of that new program. But again, the highest level indicator that we discuss is the graduation rate, which will be in departmental reports, and it will make more sense with the census approach. Again, very different cohort, very different age grouping, but again, those two facets we hope, based on what we've discussed with partners, will show that movement over time of the impact of the changes.
Thank you. Merci, Madame Gill.
Thank you, Ms. Gill.
6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. First, I will ask Indigenous Relations people, and I will repeat the question I asked to Minister Hajdu. The first question, given that in the federal government we have the Indigenous Languages Act, in the Act, Section 10.1, it says federal institutions will provide access and services in Indigenous languages. So now I will ask you, how many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis schools have access to education in their own Indigenous languages in the school system?
So I think the question was directed at Ms. Elout.
It was to Crown Indigenous Relations.
Okay. Or did you say, or both? Or
I don't know which one. I don't know what their roles are.
So to our guest today, does somebody wish to offer an answer with respect to the question from Ms. Elout?
I could go first. It's Angela Bate here. I'm the Director General for Negotiations in British Columbia, and so we are. So that's my scope of responsibility. We negotiate treaty and reconciliation agreements with First Nations across BC, as well as some in the Yukon that are not part of treaty arrangements. We do have in BC, one of the things we have been working on is a First Nations jurisdiction agreement. And within that context, we're looking to transfer jurisdiction for education to a number of First Nations, and I can specify if you're interested. One aspect of that is around First Nation language and culture. And so in the funding agreements, ongoing funding would include support for centralized services, and one piece of that is around First Nations language and culture. A second more general point with respect to language and culture is just that it is a priority for many of the tables that we negotiate with on an ongoing basis, and we bring in our colleagues from other departments with relevant expertise to determine how they would take responsibility for language and culture within their own communities. Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to add to what has been said?
Hello, I'll just add to that. So I work with sectoral self-government agreements, and we have two that I would speak to that have immersion elements to them. One is the Mi'kmaq Agreement, EMK Agreement in Nova Scotia, where there are 12 First Nations, and the other is the Anishinaabe First Nation Agreement, where there are 23 communities, and both of those sectoral self-government agreements allow for First Nations to decide how they want to deliver programming. And in both situations, there is immersive programming from at least K to grade 3 or grade 4. I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. I will ask Rory O'Connor. The federal government, for the past 46 years, since 1951 to 1997, have paid to build and staff 13 residential schools within Nunavut, with the express purpose of eradicating Inuit culture and language. But you are the employers. I am sure you are given a lot of directions about reconciliation and the strategy. Reconciliation is very important. Since reconciliation is so important, will this federal government fund 13 Inuit language and culture schools for in the future?
I hate to answer it in part this way. I'm responsible for infrastructure delivery on reserves, so that is in the south, in the provinces. I'm not sure if anyone can take that from the CERNA side. I will say that there is a fund related to residential schools of $100.1 million for former residential schools that still exist. I'd be happy to provide a little bit more information for what can be done with those buildings that still exist, and communities want to do something with it, whether it's commemoration or others. But we have reached out to communities across the country on that fund. So, but as to your main question, I'm not sure if anyone from CERNA is able to answer for the North.
And if you cannot reply immediately while you're here, I would like to have a written report and an update on the question. Thank you.
Do our guests undertake to provide a written answer to the question that was asked by Ms. Idlaut? Thank you, Mr. O'Connor. With that, we'll start a second round. We'll start with Mr. Melillo for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, thank you to our witnesses from the departments for being here as part of this important discussion. And I know we've talked about, I'll start with Indigenous Services Canada. I know we've spoken quite a bit about the targets around graduation rates, and I do want to come back to that just a little bit more. When the minister was here, she spoke about the coming plan that I suppose we'll see in the fall around some of those graduation targets. And I'm just curious if those targets will include a breakdown of targets for students who are attending school on reserve, as well as Indigenous students that are part of the provincial system and living off reserve, or attending off reserve, I should say.
So the graduation rate will be students funded by ISK, which are First Nations students who are ordinarily resident on reserve that attend either First Nations administered schools or provincially operated schools, meaning that they travel off reserve to those schools, those local schools, or private or federal schools. So they will, all of those types of students within the student body will be reported on.
Thank you. And I'm just curious, going a bit broader than just the graduation rates themselves. Obviously, that's a very important metric that should be tracking, perhaps the most important. But is there a plan, or is there perhaps already a process where the department is measuring things like attendance rates as well, and for example, or maybe some other metrics to measure the success of your programs so far?
Attendance and participation is a key part of what we're hearing at regional education agreement tables. Like I said earlier, those are the venues where partners can look at needs, outcomes defined by their vision for education within their communities, either one community or multiple. And the basic tenets that come up are students participating in class, are they progressing, and are they completing? Beyond that, we work to have our partners tell us what that means to them. So we've heard examples of potentially a longer secondary to accommodate family or working needs, or potentially a shorter, or different times of year, a year-long education secondary grade. All of those things are possible through the development of a regional education agreement. The departmental indicators are anchored around that graduation rate, but the regional education agreements let us go a bit further. And the engagement that is happening on the departmental indicators is similar, but we try to make it as minimal as possible in recognition of First Nations control and eliminating the reporting burden on information and data that isn't being used to generate that funding. And striking that right balance is exactly what we're discussing through co-development with our partners, with the AFN, but also individual regional tables, also with the regional education agreement tables as well. So anywhere that it comes up. And we're also learning from our self-governing partners as well. There was an example to the MK agreement and some of the BC agreements as well. That jurisdictional control, with that comes all of the reporting and the data by and for the communities to their membership. And so we learn from our self-governing partners as well to guide, the right balance of what is the reach for departmental reporting and what is rightfully First Nations controlled. Thank you.
I appreciate that, and I think I'll probably have time for one more question here, and I just want to touch on something that I believe the minister was speaking a bit about as well in terms of some of those connected issues, not necessarily when it comes to education specifically, but the things that impact education, some of those more socioeconomic issues, things like the infrastructure gaps that we're seeing, things like the boil water advisories. There's still many communities, of course, across the country, many in my own riding in northwestern Ontario that are fighting and hoping to have clean water and improved infrastructure, despite some significant progress, no doubt, that has been made. Of course, we know that there's still a large gap there. So has there been metrics used by the department to measure or account for how those types of issues, social issues, are creating barriers to education as well?
The department does look to community well-being and different indices that link some of the fundamental health, the community safety, the community infrastructure, as well as education together. And that's the context that we hear partners talk about tracking and reporting of year-over-year change, because there's so much involved in it that creates some opportunity to look at what the influences are, where there are some successes, where there is more work need to be done across different streams of the department, and we do look at that very much. Again, in regional education agreements, it's an opportunity to take a broader look, and in self-government agreements as well, where there may be other sectoral subjects that come together. They can be tied together that way, but it's definitely as holistic as we can make it from what we've learned from our partners.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Malilo. We'll go to Ms. Atwin now for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. I'm going to ask my question to Mr. O'Connor, and similarly to the questions that Ms. Idiot was asking with regards to building schools and how important that piece is. Certainly, the effort that was put into the residential school system should be outmatched by our efforts now to address the wrongs that were done. And I know that there's a community in my riding in particular that has applied to have a school built on reserve. Access to land is an issue. But can you just give a bit of an example of why communities might not receive that funding, or a proposal might not be funded to build a school, just so we can have a better idea of how to support communities in their dream, should that be their goal to have a community school?
Thank you for that question. And this is one that touches me close to home. I worked for over 6 years as Associate Regional Director General in the Atlantic region. So I've been in schools throughout the 4 Atlantic provinces. I've seen, the communities who have a new school, how well they're using it. It goes right into this study, into educational attainment. But it's also important to the community. Those are places for gatherings. In some places, it's emergency shelters for extreme weather, so they're so important for communities. I would say one of the key things is a lot of additional funds have gone into school builds over the last number of years. There's been a number of new schools built thanks to the dedicated funding, but there is still a huge demand. And part of that is related to inflation, COVID cost increases, supplies. There is a demand. There is a list of schools that are waiting out there to be built. So, we have to prioritize what is built in cooperation with communities. But some of the things that we look at, obviously health and safety, the condition of the current facility. We look at overcrowding. We look at accessibility of schools off reserve. That is one potential consideration. The design cost efficiency opportunities, because sometimes it might make more sense to build a new school than keep an old school running and try to do the repairs to it. So those are some of the key prioritization principles that we are looking at when we're trying to do that prioritization of what can be funded and what can't. And timing might also be a question that's looked at, and when could it be, the shovel be put into the ground.
Great, thank you very much. And kind of in that same vein, speaking to how important schools are in that, they become the heart of the community. There's a center of activity. In my experience here on the East Coast, most band operator community schools are K-8. There aren't very many that go to that secondary level. And what we've seen statistically is that the highest dropout rates are in that grade 9. So the first time you're entering the high school stage, because it doesn't have that same feel. There isn't that representation. Perhaps it's located outside the community, and there's a transportation piece as well. So I'm just wondering a little bit more about those tripartite tables for discussions with provinces and territories who are then responsible for that delivery of education and where they might be falling short on reaching these outcomes. How can we better support, changes there as well that are slightly outside of our jurisdiction? And perhaps for Crown Indigenous Relations would be the better place to have the answer.
I could perhaps start for that tripartite. So our Education Partnerships Program and streams of funding through the education branch of ISC support tripartite work with First Nations, provinces, and the federal government to look at what types of supports students need to transition between systems, data sharing between provincial school boards and communities on their student results, participation of communities in provincial boards, because both students who may ordinarily be resident on reserve attend provincial schools, but also the Indigenous students in a provincial system can can be the focus of provincial activities to sort of shape and improve language, culture, things like that, connections to communities. So that program exists, and there are memorandums of understanding and different tables and activities across the country that support that tripartite as well, if that helps.
Sure. If there's anything to add for the other witnesses. If not, okay. I mean, I think that there's a lot that we need to do as far as those tables of discussion and ensuring kind of everyone's on board. And I've certainly seen a lot of development in that area. And part of that, though, is with department officials who are coming in to kind of check in. So, for example, doing the nominal roll every year when I was working in Indigenous schools, kind of having, the Indigenous and Services Canada officials come in and kind of check and see if your data is accurate, if you're crossing your T's and dotting your I's. And oftentimes, teachers who were employed through the community felt a little bit as if they were misunderstood. So has there anything been done there for, sensitivity training, cultural training to ensure that anyone who's entering into these schools or into communities has that background to kind of make those involved feel comfortable and respected?
Yes, as departmental employees, there is cultural awareness training, different kinds of activities that we do to understand our colleagues and the best way to work together with First Nation partners. Also, we've established in the education branch an education data unit that includes a training stream, and that is as much training for our own staff about the data in, data out points on education, given that student data is some of the most sensitive, and the nominal role, which you referred to as the registry of eligible students. And those activities take place at the sort of front lines with school administrators in communities. And we have a system that gives communities access to all of their own data with all of the principles of ownership and control, so that communities can use that data to drive some of their own strategies and work and school lists in the same way that it is also used to drive funding. So I would say that overall that's where the relationship really happens on the front lines, and we've worked to try to anchor it in data that is owned by our partners, and the use of it by the department and its purpose is very clear. And again, that links back to what we learned from the Auditor General's report as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Atwin. Madame Gill, pour 2 minutes et demie.
Ms. Gill, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. With your permission, I would like to turn my time over to Mrs. Laut, of course.
Thank you, Marilyn. I do have many questions, but I'm trying to determine which is the most pertinent question, and will they have the answer? Will they have done any work on it regarding schools and education? We use it in education is delivered in the white man's way of teaching. We Indigenous people do not graduate, have a low graduate rate because it's not our culture nor our language. It's a foreign way of thinking. When people graduate, people are not graduating or dropping out. We know way too many do not graduate, and way too many drop out. Those that are not completing their education, if they are hunters and if they are sewers, artists, can we look at them with those applications as a way for them to make their own living? As they grow older, they don't plan to go back to school. They don't plan to graduate. The educational system is behind them. Many do not practice traditional skills like hunting or sewing because they're not given the opportunity to learn that or or even taught that education is very important. Learning in a white people's language is not the only way to attain a good education. We Indigenous people have our own culture. We have our own language. Our lives and our being has to be present in the school system, in our homeland. You have to ask yourself, because you're not Indigenous, you do not look Indigenous, you look other. Where in your workplace do you encourage your superiors and your co-workers to include more the Indigenous language and the culture in the school system? How would you encourage that? How can you encourage that to happen more? I will ask those to Jonathan and Rory.
Thank you for that question. The Indigenous Crown Partnership, the Inuit Crown Partnership table is a really important venue where we learn about the priorities, the visions, the context, the culture of Inuit partners. That is what directly informed a lot of the post-secondary work. We know that elementary and secondary is a priority there, and so through that venue is a concrete way that we learn and we talk about what we can bring into the department in our work from partners, and where there may be certain paths to solutions. Also within the department as well, we do have information sharing sessions, and where we bring partners in from various places, from our Northern Affairs colleagues and our self-governing partners as well. So that's a way we integrate it, but for the concrete programs, it's mainly through that bilateral mechanism. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can just add on to that. A couple of concrete things. It's the importance of having Indigenous people in the workplace, so Inuit, First Nation, Métis in the workplace, and the department has done a relatively good job of that, and the numbers are increasing. That's not sufficient on its own, as Jonathan had said. Learning activities. I know in the Atlantic we made a point of having all staff meetings where people could learn. There were opportunities to learn, languages in the region. So for example, Mi'kmaq, even if it's just a few words or a greeting, just to have that awareness. So, there's that kind of thing. There's the more formal thing, like trying to ensure that we have 50% Indigenous employees within the department. And I don't know if there's anything that Serna wants to add to that one as well.
Thanks, Rory. I can add, we have similar objectives in terms of hiring Indigenous staff. We probably lag a bit behind Indigenous services in terms of our results at this point in time. But one of the things we're working on is simply to create a healthy, safe workspace where all of our employees, including our Indigenous employees, are free to express their thoughts, contradict us if needed, and share their experiences. We also put a significant emphasis on Indigenous learning. There's a mandatory 15 hours per year requirement for all of our employees. And I just wanted to comment around one of the things you said a bit earlier around the importance of Indigenous people being in charge of their own learning and their ways. The work that I came here to talk about is still pretty early in terms of its implementation. We signed the first agreements in 2021 and implemented with the first 4 nations in 2022. But we do hear back from some of those communities about the importance of this work. And one of the quotes in particular is just that there is a momentum of hopefulness and community pride as we move towards control of our education model that is based on our own principles, such as Akatman, how our ancestors did things. And that's, I think, an example of what we're hearing back from the communities. We don't have results to report at this stage in terms of graduation rates, but the feeling of ownership and responsibility as they take on jurisdiction, I think is remarkable. So thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Edlout. That brings our second panel to completion. So thank you very much, Ms. Bate and Ms. Saville, for joining us online. And thank you, Mr. O'Connor and Mr. Allen, for being with us in person today to answer our questions. With that, committee members, this panel is adjourned. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.